We had around 100 register for this. We recorded for those who can't attend today. Usually we see some drop off as normal, but we will record that and it will also be on our YouTube channel afterwards as well. Please do put any questions you have in the chat, okay? If we don't get back to you in this session, we'll then get back to you directly and with individual follow-ups, but we will have a Q&A session at the end of this as well. Apologies if I have any coughing fits throughout. I'm just recovering from COVID, not quite 100%, but almost back there. So I do apologize if I have to take a slight break for water as we go through. So just some house rules that our marketing team always makes us show. The session will be recorded for today, okay? Please do mute your microphones so we don't have any interruptions to the session. We will also probably mute you if you come on, if you don't mind. If you do have any questions, like I said, please do put them into the chat box, or do even, raise your hand during the Q&A session that we will have later as well. So today we will be sharing a flavour of our findings into the recent research amongst CX professionals, like everybody on the call. We'll delve into a little bit about the current state of play of CX. We'll have a look at the experience management maturity levels, some of the challenges that we're facing, and obviously, of course, of the top priorities that we're looking at as well in the next 12 months, okay? With that, I'll be myself covering this for the first 15 minutes or so, and then we'll jump into a panel discussion, which my colleague Saurabh will moderate, okay? And we've got Sri joining us, who's Head of Customer Care at Philip Morris Malaysia. We've worked together several times across a few organizations. KB, who's the Head of Customer Advocacy at Telecom Malaysia. We work quite closely on a few projects at the moment. Wei Song, who is the Director of Analytics and CX at Prudential Assurance Malaysia, one of my first clients when I moved across to Malaysia 12 years or so ago. So it's great to have you all on today, and thank you very much for your time for this session as well. So just for a bit more background on the session, just some further context. We do this globally, and we have been doing this since 2021. Okay, fieldwork is always run about Q3 of each year. So this round across Asia Pacific, we had around 250 respondents, and we had around 30 plus for Malaysia. We covered off 14 different markets in APAC, around 11 different sectors. We do have a lot more than I can get through today. I really want to give the time to the panelists in the discussion, where I think we'll get a lot of that information. So after this, we will send out the wider deck to everybody, and that will be available as well as the recording itself. But we'll just be touching on some of the high-level areas for discussion. So just firstly, as we go through, you'll see some data in the brackets, okay? This is where we are referring to the Asia Pacific data. The Malaysia data will be referenced outside of the brackets itself, okay? So just first and foremost, looking across the recognition of CX and EX in our organizations, and also how we deliver upon that. It's great to see that 94% of CX professionals agree that the companies that continue to invest in CX will outperform the competitors. And that's significantly more than the APAC score. We can see at 52%, and it's actually closer to scores that we see in the US and Europe and some of the Western markets. In that same direction, when you see nearly 60% of all XM practitioners expect that the recognition of the importance of the practice to grow in the boardroom, okay? It's marginally under the APAC scores, but it's still high, and it's growing year on year as we go through. When looking at the levels of CX maturity in the organization, and for this we use the Ipsos CX maturity model, which I'll take us through a bit later. Only 10% of us state that we are leading, okay, based on that model. So work can really be done here to understand what competencies we need to focus on and how to really increase those maturity levels. And that brings with it the increases in the business performance, etc., that we'd expect with that. But only 3% here admit that the delivery given, CX delivery, is generally worse than what we have promised, right? And I think that's a figure we all maybe need to look into a bit more. It seems slightly unrealistic to me. It's significantly better than APAC and our global scores. So I maybe question if there's a little bit of a gap in our understanding, or if we're being critical enough of ourselves and our organization, and how we measure across that end-to-end journey to ensure that we are delivering the promise that we have made to our customers. As the value of CX and also EX continues to grow, right, we must focus on implementing some specific initiatives. So in the next 12 months, these are some of the areas and some of the themes that have came out from the respondents. Okay, so firstly, we see around recognition of EX and CX at board level. So I mentioned that in the previous slide. There is an increase in the recognition. And I think it's great for us as CX practitioners or owners in our organizations, as our insights and data will get much more focused. But on the other hand of the spectrum, probably means we're going to be working a lot harder as more and more focus comes on that. And the C-suite are adamant to see some of the KPIs and the performance across that end-to-end journey. Second probably comes hand in hand, right? As we see that recognition and the importance of CX and EX improve, training-related activities is something that we are seeing our clients invest, and it's likewise to what we are doing at Ipsos as well, right? We have a large-scale CX Master Series accreditation program that all of our CX employees will go through, and that basically upskills in the end-to-end sort of measurement, CX insight, voice of customer side of things. So I think that's very tangible and relatable to what a lot of you are also doing at the moment. Thirdly is just on the overall EX and CX performance, the focus on that. So I think as we'd expect, a more focus on our performance there, wider attention to the KPIs and the relevant components that come with that. And then lastly is the investment on EX and CX. I think that's jumped up close to 20% versus last year. And I think we've seen that increasing year on year since we've tracked, since COVID has sort of ended the major impact that they've had on that. So it's good to see the continual expected increase there. I think this investment really requires teams to be able to deliver. So it's also why training is one of those areas of focus, right? Enabling teams to be capable of handling more complex, more experienced data as well. But with all this focus, CX is still very tough to get right, okay? So if we take a closer look at performance in 2023, only 6% of practitioners point to any sizable improvement in their CX performance over the past year. And actually, on the opposite side, 10% have seen a drop, okay? Slightly less than what we see across Asia Pacific, so slightly better performance in Malaysia, but ultimately there we are still seeing a significant amount of our companies, our clients, who are seeing a drop in that performance. When we look across Asia Pacific from a sector-wide perspective, automotive is actually leading the way, where around 50% have stated they've seen an improvement in the overall delivery, followed by retailers and then financial services, which sits around the 40% mark. Okay, so some industries across Asia Pacific really seeing a difference to what we see here at the Malaysia level. The results do tell us there's still a lot of room for improvement, right? Especially when it comes to translating the CX insights into those tangible improvement areas. So I think for Malaysia, we need to think about what are some of those barriers for us and how we can overcome these. So just looking here around if we can prove the return on customer experience investment, okay? We're on par with Asia Pacific data here. We can see relative similarities across all of the scale measures that we have. We do see that being able to prove ROCE, which is return on customer experience investment, is still not a done deal for many organizations, okay? Still very few have truly been able to unlock the power of linking business performance to ROCE. In fact, we see that 23% still have no established way to connect their CX to the day-to-day actions to their business return. And on their side, just 23% as well say they have been able to develop sophisticated models to quantify the link. Okay, so over 50% there in the middle have some form of evidence that CX performance is linked to the business. We are doing a lot more of this now in APAC and globally as clients come to us really to use our kind of ROCE modeling solutions that they have to try and link our performance KPIs with their investment measures and various other ways that we can model that data to help build cases for further CX investment and so on. Okay, so we do expect this to improve over the next 12 months or so. I just wanted us to have a quick look at the CX maturity framework, okay? The CX maturity framework measures across 6 core competency models. This is an Ipsos framework that's applied, but it still helps us to get a very good understanding of the market itself. So when we look across the competencies from the likes of strategy and sponsorship to future state roadmap and all the others in between, okay? So for example, for CX Insight ecosystem, we have a series of statements that rate how well you understand the delivery of experiences across your customer journey, and importantly, how this aligns back to your CX vision and also the strategy that you have. And under each of these different competencies and pillars, there's various other attributes we measure to identify that overall maturity level. So then really the advance of this practice relates to the CX maturity of the organization and how they perform in the core competencies that we see here, okay? So looking at our data, only 10%, as I mentioned before, position their organization as leading, okay, based on the framework. 48% as practiced and 42% at that more sort of lower foundational level, okay? And what we've seen over the years is that maturity levels is only slowly growing, right? No significant movement really since we first started tracking this in 2021. And it's probably expected, right? We can't expect this to just sort of happen overnight. And understandably, we're asked by clients often, about benchmarks, about what are the mature industries we can showcase. But it's interesting to note really that the data evidence is that there's no one market or no one sector that has developed superior levels of maturity, even when we look at some of the Western countries, right? It's more about brands that are scattered through all over the world, and those are the ones that have decided to invest more in CX and really turn that dial on their performance. And I think more important, it's for us to understand, when we're in the foundational or even in the practice level, to really get a clear view of the current gaps and where we need to go in those paths to achieve that desired vision and desired measure of maturity we want to get to. So like I said, to really advance in the level of maturity, we need to work ourselves up across those core CX competencies, right? Again, we've got the scores here for Malaysia versus Asia Pacific, okay? I just wanted to highlight out two core areas in Malaysia where we see those higher percentages sitting at the foundational level of understanding. Those are both evidence impact and also for ESG, okay? Evidence impact really is about how we demonstrate the value of customer experience to the our own wider organization, wider business, right? It guides your investment, helps you to prioritize and predict change and so on with that. ESG, of course, environmental, social, and governance has become a popular topic, right? Both in APAC and globally, it's quickly jumped onto the corporate agenda. But again, we see here it's also a very foundational level. And I think, almost 50% really state that it's at the foundational stage. So if you'd like to go a bit further into this, we have produced a thought paper on this, so feel free to look that up. We can send this out as well with the thank you note for joining the webinar, so you can have quick access to that. But it just gives you about some ideas of how other organizations is embedding ESG and looking at that from a CX angle and lens, and gives you some ideas to work with as well. Just now moving on to some of the top priorities that we see, okay? So first and foremost, we see the ranking order. Personalization has came through. That's probably not a surprise to, excuse me, to many of you. And when we look further into the data, we do see that the majority stated your organization's personalization capabilities are limited at this stage, right? Most at best, probably through a more manual process rather than an AI-focused topic. And the main discussion we're hearing quite a lot across Asia Pacific and across a few in Malaysia at the moment is really about how to include generative AI. Now, I think, on the positive note, us as CX practitioners probably have an advantage on this, right? Because machine learning, AI has been used in personalization for several years already for us. So I think out of all the business functions in the organization that are considering this and looking through this more, us as the CX teams are probably most ready to hit the ground running, right, with new experimental use cases and so on. So let's lead the way and continue to do so with personalization. Second is around closing the brand promise gap. And when reviewing these results, I was quite pleased to see this. We recently published a white paper, really a research paper showing how important this is. And again, we can send this all to you afterwards that you can look through the details. But it did show that it's a very important priority, and missing or meeting or exceeding these expectations really has a direct impact on revenue overall. Okay. Third is linking CX and EX data. And as we see that, this comes together more and more, organizations are realizing the importance of getting this right and seeing how we can link, seeing how we can measure, seeing how we can mirror to ensure we get the CX delivery correct across both while keeping our employees happy. And lastly was around define CX strategic roadmap. And I know that, a lot who registered for this webinar, at least we've had a few of these discussions around how can we help with the vision, how can we help with the future state, how can we continue to mature with this. And when we look further in the data behind this, just over 50% in Malaysia claimed that their organization has a formal CX governance structure in place, where this CX governance team has the authority to allocate resources to CX activities, etc. Okay, so even though it's 50%, there is still a lot to be done. A structure without that accountability and clear definition on the objectives and so on can make for slower decision making and constant uphill battles. Okay, so really need to strive to make sure we have that governance in place, which will often come through getting the roadmap correct. Just on to the last couple of slides before we go into the panel discussion. And I think it's good to finish with the challenges. Okay, so again, the feedback from all of the CX practitioners here. Some external pressures do still play a part, right? We see the business uncertainty impacting the ability to make decisions, which will obviously impact on the people and the budget that we have available, and so on and so on. And I think last year we saw an almost perfect storm for CX practitioners, where there was a mix of all the external pressures, the internal pressures, but I think at least this time round that seems to have calmed a little, though some of them do still exist. Removing silos also got a concern. So we know that teams that operate in silos and with little the governance we've talked about make it very hard to produce those end results that we want, almost clash and so on. So that's something that a lot of you are looking to overcome. People budgets I mentioned, then it really comes into the AI and omni-channel sort of technology. Last year round, we did see that omni-channel was one of the biggest challenges we were facing, okay? Both in the ways to listen here and also in the ways to communicate outwards with customers. So I think given these, we can probably partially understand why practitioners have stated that working on personalization in their CX roadmap has grown in importance. And I think we need to assist with these most major challenges that we see here. So just to summarize from a key takeaway perspective, the top priority wise, we saw personalization come through, okay? That was ranked number 2 in Asia Pacific, number 1 in Malaysia. Closing the brand promise gap, again, that was ranked number 3 in APAC, second for us. And then we see define a strategic roadmap and linking EX and CX data as third place respectively. So significant overlap with Asia Pacific, which I think is good for those that are in multi-country organizations, right? That agenda, that plan should cover off various similar priorities across. And just on the challenges that we just discussed in the last page, really, the business uncertainty aspect is still there. We saw that last time round, but it seems like that big major perfect storm isn't as bad as it was before. Removing silos as we discussed, budget pressure coming through both for CX and EX. And we talked a little bit just briefly there, touched on tech and AI as some of the core components for that as well. So I don't want to talk too much longer. I'd like to pass over to our guests that are kindly joining. Ask them to come on video if you're not already. And I will pass over to my colleague Saurabh, who will now moderate the discussion as well.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. A fantastic day to host this seminar because today also happens to me by my birthday. For now, let me just don the researcher's hat and try to delve into some questions. We'll allocate 30 minutes for panel discussion, 3 questions to our panelists. And what a researcher usually does is they'll try to deep dive into the data, try and see, okay, this matches, this doesn't match. A lot of questions for me as well. So let's try to start off with the first question for the panelists. In the interest of all the audience who are joining us, I'll be a bit slow because they don't have the deck for their reference. So in terms of the data or in terms of the information that I'm going to pull out, it will take some time for that to sink in. Okay, so let's start off with my first observation, which is on CX recognition and delivery. Now, the data suggests that across APAC, we see that 52% state that CX delivery is in line with what was promised, 52%. But surprisingly, we see that this number shoots up to 94% in Malaysia. Now, a couple of thoughts that just raised my mind is, we don't seem to be that polarized or that differentiated enough. Now, is there a
Yes,
potential
alright.
gap in our
Sorry, can you go
understanding?
to full screen? Can you go to full screen? It's on, we can see the notes now. Thank you.
Let me share again. Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Continue, sir.
Yeah. So, so we are talking about 52% and we were talking about 94% in Malaysia with respect to delivering what we've promised. So is there a potential gap in our understanding? I mean, are we being too optimistic? Are we not being critical enough? Do we know how we deliver across this end-to-end customer journeys? I think it would be great to hear the respective stories. So maybe I'll start with Visiong, if that's okay.
Sure. And firstly, happy birthday, Sarab. I think we should at least acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and many happy returns of the day. I think you brought an interesting point. I do not necessarily think it is a sort of polarization. I just think that when you look into contextually into this part of the world, right, I think we tend to look into things at a more on an average level. So we don't have very extreme ends of either one. So I guess that is when people sort of have that whole stay in the middle, and that is probably the reason why you see that differentiation. Because when we look into that one data point that you mentioned, when I was paying attention to all the other data points that Chris was sharing, while the numbers numerically are different, I think what we can also see is the direction, which are the larger components that are fairly consistent, whether it's APAC or the rest of the world. So I guess I just would like to put forth that point of view first. Yeah.
So is there any metric or tool that we have in place to measure like how we are performing versus the brand promise?
I think if you look into that, I think more importantly is we need to first define what is our brand promise. I think often there could potentially be a gap in many organizations in terms of what the provider wants to communicate as their brand promise, and to the actual consumers, how they interpret that brand promise. So I think before we even look at the gap, I think we need to see whether there is any inconsistency. I think that is important, and that should be picked up in a lot of other research that we do, especially look at your brand track and whatnot. That should come across if you have that problem, because I remember in the past where I was working with Chris on a particular project, we actually look at the respondent from a twofold perspective to determine whether we have the problem. We look at respondents who are actual consumers who have already been exposed to the experience of the brand. And we also look at the respondents who are prospects, people who have an opinion in your brand but may not have experienced it. And for brands or organizations where there is a gap, you will see a divergent score between those two groups. And that helps us to understand where the problem is, whether you have a gap, whether there is a brand promise inconsistency.
Okay, so then we are talking about like having a yardstick which has to be very formal in terms of us first understanding how do we measure brand promise. Okay, maybe now I'll ask KB, with so many interesting things happening with the brand Unify, it being known as a standalone brand and so on and so forth, like not exactly detaching itself from Telecom Malaysia, but being a very strong brand. So are we delivering on brand promise? Is it as high to say that, all of us are?
When we talk about the brand promise, I think what Visiong said is correct. Exactly what do we want to deliver, right? For TM, for example, we have the mother brand, which is TM. And as you know, TM being a GLC and a PLC, has different, responsibility. And the promise is at a national level. There is a part of it that is part of the nation building. And then we have the Unify brand, which is seen as a bit more, out there, going to the market, to the consumer market, and serving, and a bit more from a perspective of competitiveness. We have players, other players as well that to consider, right? So when we talk about, so for example, today, when we talk about Unify, it's put out there as the brand that will what you call this, make it easy for you in terms of communication, in terms of meeting your lifestyle needs, right? So, and from a perspective of CX, obviously, then what we look at is that how do we actually make sure that whatever that we promise from a unified perspective meets what we are doing on the CX level. So what customer is experiencing is consistent with what the brand is promising. And we do measure across all. You know, while then we may see some discrepancies, but I think right now the team, you know, internally we do look at both all this data and try to make sure, you know, that at the end of the day, there is whenever there is a discrepancy, there is also a good discussion as well as analysis of why does that happen. So that's very important. I think the ability for you to, I guess, admit that you know, and be open about it, that you know there are things that you may not yet deliver is very important. I think the self-critical ability is very important. You know, in CX, you cannot be, you know, resting on your laurel and be satisfied just because, for example, we have the largest market share at the moment for fixed services, and that's it. You know, we can't do that because what we found out in the last few years, right, especially doing NPS, is that the more quiet the customer, the more dangerous they are. And you know, there is a need for you to actually ensure that you know, you do touch base with them to find out what's happening, because if not, suddenly you just if not, you will not realize when they suddenly just leave. You know, so that's what's happening here.
Now let's hear from Steve. So we've heard insurance perspective, we have heard a utility come telecom perspective, coming to a very interesting and dynamic category like yours. So how would you see this, or how would you interpret this data?
First of all, Sarah, happy birthday.
Thank you.
So Sarah, coming back to your question, right? Are we being critical enough? Are we delivering our brand promise? I think, like what Rachel said, generally Malaysians are very generous lot. We're very forgiving and we're very generous with our thoughts. So I'm not really surprised with the results that we overrated ourselves compared to our APAC peers. But if you look at the CX landscape, right, almost all organizations are taking conscious effort to drive the customer experience to deliver the brand promise. It remains an agenda in almost all CX level. Like even as consumers ourselves, right, I'm sure you are exposed to the increasing number of NPS surveys, invitation to participate in research groups or focus groups. So the effort is there. And, you know, organizations are collecting customer feedback. They actually, you know, in various methods, they actually use the listen, learn, act framework to do improvements. I guess the question is, are we keeping up with the brand promise? Are we keeping up with the customers' expectations?
Right.
You know, it's evolving day by day. I think, in my opinion, right, that could be the discrepancy in the statistics that we see within APAC and also Malaysians generally. Because Malaysians as a whole lot, we are working very hard to improve the CX. You can see with the growing number of CX practitioners.
Perhaps I'll conclude it as we are being critical. Like I heard from Yuseong that, you know, we need a yardstick which has to be very clear to us. I heard from KB that we can't sit on our laurels. We have to be critical on ourselves. And when I hear from you, it's a similar story in terms of we are measuring it and we are making our efforts. But, you know, let's try to make it a consistent effort. So that brings to my next observation, which is in line with what we are talking about, which is to say that, you know, getting CX right is tough, because one of the slides that we saw, the number was very, very low in terms of the people who saw that, you know, there's a big improvement. So 6%, only 6% noted that there's a big improvement in terms of their CX performance versus last year. Now, this result just tells me that, you know, there's a lot of room for improvement when it comes to translating CX insights into tangible improvements. Now, the question that comes to my mind first is, you know, what is stopping us? Or what are the barriers? What are the challenges? So maybe Shri, I mean, we may continue with you because you were on that point already. Just to try and understand that you are putting in a lot of efforts, but do you think that there are any barriers or any challenges that you're facing, or anything that could be acting as a deterrent? You can take some cues from the CX maturity map that we showed you in terms of the different parameters in an organization, which needs to be in line for you to be a success story. So yeah, your thoughts, your organization.
I think the drop in performance could be a outcome of the evolving CX complexity. Like when we started out, you look at the nature of the metrics, you probably started out with NPS, customer satisfaction, CSAT, but now the metrics has actually evolved to more complex metrics, like, for example, retention, referrals, even revenue, costs, and profits. And the like what Chris mentioned earlier, measuring the investment that we put in CX versus the the ROI. That's another factor that we are under constant pressure as well. And in terms of expectations of organizations, CX takes a lot of time to actually realize the benefits. So I think in order to look at this holistically, right, we need to be very clear about what metrics we're measuring. It needs to be a blend of both qualitative and quantitative, and also the time that we set ourselves to see whether is there an improvement or is there a degradation. We need to have mid to long term. So I think one of the tough ones that we need to uncover is the evolving CX complexities.
Point taken. Maybe I'll jump to VCong now in terms of understanding that, is there any barrier with respect to the industry or with respect to a particular organization which is stopping you from, realizing your maximum potential, or in terms of, not being able to turn it to tangible improvements?
I think in my view, right, I mean, let's focus on these two data points, right? The green portion talks about a big improvement. I think it is important for us to acknowledge that with CX, it is not a destination, it is a journey. So if you look at whether there is a big improvement in CX over the past year, that is actually quite a big task, because oftentimes it is a collection of progressive improvements to make the overall customer experience or the customer journey better for an organization. So I'm actually not surprised at these numbers, and you see there is some form of consistency, be it within Malaysia or the APAC numbers in bracket, right? Because you're talking about 6 and 5%. And I know that if you look at on the flip side, where you look at the 10 and the 18%, if you look at what is in between, the amber part, it is about, if I mathematically calculate correctly, it is about 84 and 77%, right? So it's pretty much there in terms of the size or the dimension of the responses, I would say, right? Because whatever is different, I would say that, and Chris knows this, right? Those are not necessarily statistically significant. But if I were to look at the red portion, I think when people say that they saw a drop in CX performance, it may not necessarily mean that the organization have gone backwards. It could also mean that the expectations have gotten a lot higher, and the expectations growth from their consumers is moving at a faster pace versus what the organization could cater for. So maybe that is why you see a bit of those. And sometimes it also could lead to, it could also be due to certain situational one-off or one-timer situation in a particular year. So I would say that if you look into this, yes, I know your headline says getting it right is tough. I would say that the focus to me is not the red or the green part, but the amber. Majority of people are getting it quite right, progressively moving along and progressively driving improvements in CX, which is really part of the whole journey theory I was talking about.
Yeah, I think you've beautifully summed up with your first statement, which is to talk about that it's not a destination, but it's a journey. And we give a lot of importance these days to the customer journey mapping also, because it just brings us into life, into what has changed, and how do customers interact with us, the different touch points, and the different channels. So now, KV's point of view, I know it's a controversial question, but let me give some cues in terms of what could be the challenges. So as a layman, I mean, what I can think of is probably sponsorship. I can think of, not having an integrated structure, or let's say, not having accountability. So what is it that is impacting you the most, if any? And if not, then we are happy to hear the other part of the story as well.
I think, in terms of getting the buy, like what you were asking, whether is it a leadership issue or not, right?
Any challenge, yes.
Yeah, sponsorship of, the CX agenda in a company. From that perspective, I don't think any of us, would have any issues in getting that sponsorship. At one level, on one side, the management, or rather the leadership, would want you to actually drive CX. But then again, there is also that pressure from the shareholders, from the market, and the time that is given to you to drive the CX agenda. And Sri rightly put it, CX is not, and also Wee Seong actually, it's a journey. It's not a destination, and it takes time. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not something that you can, you wish something to happen and then it turns around overnight. And that's, I think, the luxury that majority of us don't have, that ability to, how much time is a fair time for CX to turn around, for example. And that's always a question of, what do you, whether what you're doing is contributing to the revenue, and how do you, quantify that. And then, for us, for example, the last year, what we did is that we look at it from 3 different perspectives, whether we are looking into driving it from a cost, perspective, how CX is actually contributing to cost management, and then obviously driving the revenue as well. So because, CX is always seen as a cost factor, unfortunately. The things that you do a lot of times, are seen that, okay, the ROI, and Shri put it just now, it's very difficult to quantify, right? On the normal business case that you have. So you have to be a bit more creative in, providing the ROI. So I think that's one of the major challenges. And I think the other one is that, for us, for example, when you are serving a market where you want to serve everyone, and you can't do everything. So from that perspective, it's also about, deciding which segments that you want to focus on, that, drives the most. And then at the end of the day, it will trickle to the other segments that you also serve. Because unfortunately, you don't have a huge budget to serve and to personalize it to everyone. And in this day and age, especially after COVID and the pandemic, right, you see that behavior. And, when I see a drop in CX performance, I believe that it is, when you put it in context, it is from an expectation perspective. Customers, after pandemic, the behavior, the expectations are different, are more sophisticated, I believe. There are things that, they expect the service providers, the companies that are, providing for them, to actually meet those expectations. And when you put that into context, that would be the one that is a challenge. So at the end of the day, the company can do all sorts of things, but if you are not talking to the right customer, you will never meet the expectation of the customer that you are serving.
So I see it more of a challenge which is coming from the external world, which is the customer, and they're changing a lot, rather than, our own stakeholders holding us back in terms of the potential. But one thing that has come out very strongly, and which I believe, Sri pointed out, KBU pointed out, probably some parts of VCM also pointed out, that there is a need for us to have a financial linkage with our performance, which is what is increasingly being asked by our stakeholders, to have a linkage between, our own CX performance, our company performance. It could be in the terms of revenue, it could be in the terms of saving costs, but there has to be a tangible linkage between these 2 parameters. Okay, let's come to the last part of the discussion, which is, we talk a lot in terms of what is important, but let's try to understand that what is coming out as a priority and moving into 2024, which are the top 4. I'll just maybe quickly run you through. So first one we talk is about personalization. The second one is closing the brand promise gap. The third one is linking EX and CX. Employee experience is becoming very popular, very relevant these days. And the fourth one is defining CX strategic roadmap. So how would your industries or how would your organizations maybe look at this piece of data, what it means to you for your organization, and are there any surprises? Maybe we start with Visyong again.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. I think if you look at all these lists of priorities, they are quite interrelated and they make a lot of sense. So I don't think there is any major surprises, because I think there is also, if you look at some of the areas or some of the statements here, it is a lot to do with assessing where we are in the CX journey. For example, you look at the develop or refine CX strategy roadmap, determine level of CX maturity, right? Reassess CX KPI targets. So to me, those are things that organizations need to reflect on and take a look at where they are and where they want to be. I think the other part you look at the other theme that's coming up for me is from this set of data is the key parts of delivering remarkable customer experience. So you talk about delivering personalized customer experience. That seems to be very important to more than half the respondents, right? Closing the gap, if any, between brand promise and CX delivery, right? And I think if you look at another part is these are emerging, what I call organizational emerging trends, talking about the linkage between CX and EX, right? And you see EX coming up quite a bit in a lot of researchers, because there's always the thought, right? In order for you to deliver remarkable CX, you need to first take care of the people who are delivering that CX, which are your employees. Hence, EX is increasingly important. And interesting enough, while it sort of is in the list, but not quite there yet in terms of importance, is define and develop ESG commitments, because I think in the longer term, these will be an emerging trend, that a space for us to watch out for. Right. But if I were to back to your point, if I were to look into it, if you ask me personally, my point of view, it's actually very important for us to develop or refine the CX strategy roadmap. And that's a reason, because I think KB spent quite a bit of time talking about linking, how do you sort of get, how do you sort of prove CX, the return on investment on CX? I think Chris talked about that. I actually have a slightly different view. I think what is important is you need to bring everyone along the journey of CX. So in the CX strategic roadmap, there has to be some connection with some of the business lever. For example, for certain industries, we look at customer lifecycle management. To me, that is an indicator of CX. Customer retention is an indicator of CX. Customer loyalty, customer who continue to repurchase, is an indicator of CX, because if you look at any brand disposition funnel, any consumers who have experienced the brand and all that, who like the brand, who will continue to stay loyal. So to me, CX is a loyalty tool, very, very important, or a framework to drive loyalty and to drive retention. And if you juxtapose that against EX, it applies as well, right? I mean, if you work for an organization and you always think, you remember your first day in the organization. You remember how the organization made you feel welcome. You will be very thankful if there's a proper onboarding, there's proper familiarization program and all that. And that makes you feel that, hey, you've joined the right organization. It's similar when the customer first, you onboard a customer, when the customer first interact with the brand. So you see, it's all related. And then you think about it for along the entire journey, when you are with a particular organization, or from a consumer perspective, when you continue to be a repeat user of a particular brand or services. So those are some of the thinking that I would like to put forth. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe to KB, the question that I'll ask is the top 4 that we have. Is there anything unique that you may see that TM is doing or would want to do in the future with respect to these aspects of linking EX, CX, or maybe delivering personalized experiences? It could be through the app, it could be through the journeys, or instead, I mean, you could also look at delivering your CX strategic roadmap. So did you find anything unique, like which has been not run of the mill this year onwards, or what could be the plan? I mean, if it's not so confidential for you to share.
Yeah, obviously, there are things that we can say, there are things that we can't, right? But, it's heartening to see this because it just, sort of tells us that, okay, somewhat we are on the right, no, not somewhat, actually, confidently we are on the right track with the rest of the CX practitioners in terms of what our focus are. Okay. And one thing in TM, right, the one thing that I think we have driven, and this is something that I'm very proud to share, to also, share with. One is that we take our, measurement tools, right? In this case, one of the tools that we use is the NPS, right? Seriously. And it's not just about the score itself. The score is just one of it, it's just the tip of it. But what's more importantly for us is that from that score comes the feedback of the customer. And that feedback is something that is valuable. And sometimes I think, a lot of us, we run a lot of surveys. She was saying, you get all sorts of different surveys that you get for NPS. You buy from Shopee, you get it. You buy from Grab, you get it, But then again, how do you use that data? What do you use it for? And that's, I think, the one that sometimes CX practitioners tend to overlook, and that's the one that is very important for us because that justify, whenever we want to do something internally, it gives us a very strong leverage because that's what the customers are saying. So, when it's what the customers are saying, when you go to the board, when you go to the management, there is a very strong correlation in doing what you are doing, in meeting what the customers want. And I think that that in itself will drive the customer loyalty that we talk about. When customers see that you are listening to them, first of all, and then using what they have given, as feedbacks to you. And I think that's when the customer feel, appreciated and valued, and, they start to like, they know that you are listening and they know that you will do something about it. So that's one thing. And the other thing in driving internally for us, in driving CX agenda, right? We also focus a lot of programs in driving mindset, and a program where we call service culture program. And we have a dedicated team that actually goes out to the ground for TM in engaging our frontliners, and to a point where right now the program is very much in demand, that even our support businesses. So for example, our support business that takes care of the building, we just ran a program for our security guards. They feel that it is important that they are at the same level as our frontliners who are serving the customer directly, because even though they are seen as the background people, but in actuality, when you walk into a customer service center, right, the guard is probably the first person that that your customers meet. And if your guard is not behaving the same way as your frontliners at the counter, there is a discrepancy there, and it leaves an impression with the customers. So we are happy to do those things. So when you talk about what we are doing, we focus both on making sure that we use the data that we have, and at the same time also making sure that everybody is on board. It's not just about and no one is too small to be on board, as I shared with you.
So that's a perfect example of how we embed the culture to the last level of the organization. And I think for concluding thoughts, we'll hear from Shri also. Let's see if we have any interesting or any innovative things that we're doing, which you can share with us.
Thanks, Sarah. I think both Wee Seong and KB have spoken a lot about the rest of it. But what I'd like to really call out, I think it's very humbling to see that, 42% of CX practitioners actually chose develop and refine CX strategic roadmap as one of the top priorities. This actually clearly calls out that, we recognize the need to unlearn, learn and relearn what's working for our customers, what's not working, and redefine the strategy. This is in line with like what I mentioned earlier, the complexity of CX and the evolving needs of customers. So this is a true testament of how we are actually trying to really meet the customer's need and do what's right by them. And I think in terms of the other one, if time permits, linking the CX and EX, both of these components are very much largely treated separately. CX is treated as one entity and employee experience to one entity. Very few organizations actually merge these two initiatives and look at it in a holistic manner. Forward-looking brands actually will see how they can create, really valuable or employee-centric experience that will then translate into really good experiences for their customers. I'd just like to call out, I actually spoke to a few fellow practitioners when I was in a regional conference last week. So they both, almost all of them recognize the importance of EX and the impact to CX. But when I asked, how do you measure it?
That was my next question to you, that are we measuring it?
I don't think so many organizations measure it and or even draw a correlation between both.
Thanks for being honest. Yes.
Hence, the importance of looking at two separate entities, but to look at it holistically.
Okay. So any thoughts, Chris? We had Chris also as one of our panelists in a way.
No, I think we got the three experts, so I didn't need to say much. So I think they've done the role perfectly. So thank you very much to all of you for joining. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted to check. Maybe Sufyan, is there any questions in the chat, or if not, is there anybody that would like to come online and ask any questions on the content that you've seen to either myself, Saurabh, or the panelists at this point in time?
You can raise your hands, you can put it on the chat box, you can even come on camera. All of that is welcome.
We're a shy group.
No questions yet, Chris.
Okay.
Does it go back to the Malaysian philosophy of again playing it safe, or
That could be it.
Okay, well, I
okay,
think
maybe
we'll
wait for 1 or 2 minutes.
I think we'll wrap up, Saurabh. If there's no questions, if there's any, I think everyone can email in and contact us afterwards. So again, I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining. Great. The recording will come out along with the thought leadership papers, etc. we mentioned. And again, lastly, thank you again to Shri Wei Song and KB as joining the panel today. We really do appreciate it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
We're closing 5 minutes.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Saurabh. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.